She was only 8 years old when the blizzard swallowed her whole, and the cabin she found buried in the snow hadn't seen a living soul in over 3 years. But inside, everything waited as if someone had just stepped out for firewood and never came back. Before we dive into the story, make sure to smash subscribe, because tomorrow we have an extra special story for you that will blow your mind. The morning had started perfect. Too perfect, maybe. Emma Hartford sat bundled in the back seat of her family's Jeep as it climbed the winding mountain road into the Rockies, her breath fogging the window while she traced patterns in the condensation. She was 8 years old, gap-toothed, and buzzing with the kind of excitement only a kid feels before their first real winter camping trip. Her dad, Michael, gripped the steering wheel with the confidence of someone who'd done this 100 times. Her mum, Sarah, studied the trail map in her lap, occasionally pointing out landmarks. And her older brother, 12-year-old Jacob, sat beside Emma with his headphones on, pretending he was too cool for family adventures but sneaking glances out the window anyway. The sky had been blue that morning, cloudless. The kind of January day that tricks you into thinking winter might go easy on you. But by the time they reached the trailhead at the base of Coldwater Ridge, the wind had started to pick up, and the temperature had dropped 10 degrees in under an hour. Emma's grandfather, a retired park ranger named Frank, had taught her to watch the sky. "Weather in the mountains don't ask permission," he used to say. "It just comes." She should have paid more attention. They geared up at the parking lot, strapping on backpacks heavy with tents, sleeping bags, and enough freeze-dried meals to last 3 days. Emma wore 2 layers under her puffy pink jacket, wool socks inside waterproof boots, and a knit hat her grandmother had made with little snowflakes embroidered on the sides. "Stay close," her mother said, adjusting Emma's backpack straps. "No wandering off, okay?" Emma nodded, too excited to worry. The trail started easy, packed snow, clear markers, tall pines stretching toward a sky that was slowly turning the color of old steel. They hiked for 2 hours, Emma keeping pace, her small legs working hard to match her father's strides. Jacob complained about the cold. Her mother pointed out animal tracks in the snow. Everything felt like an adventure. Then the wind changed. It came fast, howling through the trees like something alive and angry. The temperature plummeted. Within minutes, snowflakes began to fall, not the soft, lazy kind, but sharp and horizontal, driven by a wind that stung exposed skin. "We should head back," Sarah said, pulling her scarf tighter. Michael nodded, already turning. "Yeah, this wasn't in the forecast." But the mountains don't care about forecasts. By the time they'd gone a quarter-mile back down the trail, the snow was falling so thick Emma could barely see Jacob walking 10 feet ahead of her. The wind roared, bending trees, erasing footprints as fast as they made them. The world became a swirling wall of white. "Stay together!" Michael shouted over the wind. "Hold on to each other!" Emma reached for her mother's hand, but her glove slipped. She stumbled, her boot catching on a buried root. She went down hard, snow filling her mouth and nose. By the time she pushed herself up, gasping, wiping snow from her eyes, the shapes of her family had vanished into the storm. "Mom!" she screamed. "Dad!" The wind swallowed her voice. She spun in a circle, heart hammering. "Jacob!" Nothing. Just the roar of the blizzard and the skeletal shadows of trees bending under the onslaught. Panic clawed at her chest. She ran forward, then stopped. Which way had they gone? She couldn't see the trail, couldn't see anything. The snow was so thick it felt like being inside a shaken snow globe. "Mom! Dad! Please!" Her voice cracked. Tears froze on her cheeks. She stumbled forward, calling out, arms stretched in front of her. The wind knocked her sideways. She fell again, got up, kept moving. Her legs burned, her lungs ached from the cold. She didn't know if she was heading toward her family or deeper into the wilderness. Time lost meaning. 5 minutes or 50, she couldn't tell. All she knew was the cold, the wind, and the terror pressing down on her chest like a weight. Then, through a gap in the swirling snow, she saw it. A shape, dark, solid, a building. Emma staggered toward it, hope flaring in her chest. Maybe it was a ranger station. Maybe someone was inside. Maybe she'd be safe. She pushed through drifts that came up to her waist, her small body shaking violently now, her fingers numb inside her gloves. The structure grew clearer as she approached. It was a cabin, not large but sturdy, built from dark wood and stone, with a sloped roof heavy with snow. A single window on either side of a thick wooden door. No lights, no smoke from the chimney. But it was shelter. Emma reached the door and pounded on it with both fists. "Hello, please, I'm lost!" No answer. She tried the handle. It turned. The door swung inward with a soft creak, and Emma stumbled inside, gasping, snow tumbling off her shoulders onto the wooden floor. She slammed the door behind her, cutting off the howl of the wind. The silence that followed was so sudden, so complete, it felt like stepping into another world. Emma stood there, shaking, breathing hard, her heart still racing. She wiped snow from her face with trembling hands and looked around. The cabin was one large room with a loft above. A stone fireplace dominated one wall, wood already stacked inside it, ready to light. A small kitchen area sat in the corner, a hand-pump sink, a cast-iron stove, open shelves lined with jars and cans, a wooden table in the center of the room with 2 chairs, a cot against the far wall, neatly made with a wool blanket folded at the foot. Everything was neat, organized, preserved. But what struck Emma most was the stillness. Not the stillness of abandonment, but the stillness of waiting. There was no dust, no cobwebs, no signs of decay. It was as if someone had stepped out an hour ago and would be back any minute. On the table sat a plate, a fork, and a half-peeled potato, brown with age, but still recognizable. A coat hung on a peg by the door, heavy and wool, the kind men wore decades ago. A pair of boots sat beneath it, laces still tied. Emma's breath came out in visible puffs. It was cold inside, but not as cold as outside. The walls blocked the wind. The roof held. This place, strange as it was, had just saved her life. She moved cautiously into the room, her wet boots squelching on the floorboards. She half expected someone to appear from the loft or step out from a back room, but there was no one. Just silence. She approached the fireplace. Beside it, matches sat in a small tin box. Kindling was arranged with military precision. Whoever had lived here knew what they were doing. Her grandfather's voice echoed in her head. "First rule of survival, Emma. Warmth. You can't think if you can't feel your fingers." With shaking hands, Emma struck a match. It took 3 tries, but the kindling caught. Flames licked upward, curling around the larger logs. Within minutes, heat began to radiate into the room. Emma sank to the floor in front of the fire, pulling off her wet gloves, holding her hands toward the warmth. Relief flooded through her, followed immediately by fear. She was alone, lost, and her family had no idea where she was. Tears spilled down her cheeks, hot against her frozen skin. "I'm sorry," she whispered to no one. "I'm so sorry." But crying wouldn't help. She knew that. Her grandfather had taught her. "Panic kills faster than cold," he'd said. "Stay calm, assess, survive." Emma wiped her eyes and stood up. She needed to think, needed to figure out what to do. She walked slowly around the cabin, taking inventory. On the shelves above the sink, she found canned goods, beans, soup, peaches, old labels, the kind with hand-drawn illustrations. Some were dated. 1976, 1982, 1999. Decades old but sealed, potentially still safe. In a wooden crate beneath the table, she found more supplies. Candles, rope, a first aid kit in a metal tin, batteries, a hand-crank flashlight. Whoever had stocked this place had done so with care, with purpose. Emma moved to the cot and sat on the edge. The mattress was firm, the blanket thick. Above the bed, a small shelf held a few books, survival manuals, a Bible, a worn copy of Hemingway's The Old Man and the Sea, and beside the books, a photograph in a simple wooden frame. Emma picked it up carefully. 2 men stood side by side, arms around each other's shoulders, grinning at the camera. They were young, maybe early 20s, dressed in military uniforms. The photo was black and white, edges yellowed with age. On the back, written in faded ink, Samuel and Thomas Winter, Fort Bragg, 1943. 1943, over 80 years ago. Emma turned the photo over again, studying the faces. The taller one on the left had a square jaw and serious eyes, even while smiling. The shorter one on the right looked mischievous, like he'd just told a joke. Brothers, maybe? She set the photo down gently and looked around the cabin again, this time with different eyes. This wasn't just a forgotten structure. This was someone's home, someone's dream, someone's life. The fireplace crackled, filling the silence. Emma walked to the mantel above it and stopped. Carved into the wood, rough but deliberate, were words. Samuel Winter, 1943, waiting. Her fingers traced the letters. Waiting for what? She turned back to the room. On a small desk in the corner, she noticed something she'd missed before. A stack of letters tied with string. Beside them, a leather journal, its cover cracked with age. Emma approached slowly, almost reverently. She shouldn't touch these things. They weren't hers. But she was also 8 years old, alone and terrified, and something about this place felt like it was reaching out to her. She untied the string around the letters. The top envelope was addressed in careful handwriting. Samuel Winter, General Delivery, Coldwater Ridge, Colorado. No street address, just a name and a place. The postmark read, June 7th, 1946, almost 80 years ago. Emma opened the envelope carefully. Inside, a single page, the ink faded but still legible. Dear Sam, I know you're waiting for me, and I swear I'm coming. The docs say another month, maybe 2, and I'll be stateside. Hold tight, brother. We're going to build that cabin just like we planned, just like we dreamed about when the nights got bad. I'll see you soon. Your brother Thomas. Emma read it twice, her throat tightening. Thomas never made it. She didn't know how she knew, but she did. Something in the stillness of this place, the preserved perfection, the waiting that had never ended. She opened the next letter, then the next, all from Thomas, all promising he was coming, all filled with plans for the cabin, for the life they'd build together after the war. The final letter was dated October 19th, 1946. Sam, I'm stateside, finally. I'm in Virginia waiting on Transport West. I'll be there by Christmas, I promise. Start clearing the land. I'll bring the tools. We're really doing this, brother. After everything, we made it. See you soon. Emma set the letters down, her hands shaking. She opened the journal. The first entry was dated December 1st, 1946. Started clearing the site today. Thomas should be here in 3 weeks. The cold is brutal, but I don't mind. We've survived worse. This cabin is our promise, our future. I'll have it ready when he arrives. The entries continued. Days turned into weeks. Samuel worked alone, cutting trees, hauling stones, building walls. Each entry ended the same way. Still waiting. Emma flipped through the pages. Months passed, then years. December 19th, 47. No word from Thomas. Sent letters to every station I could think of. Someone will know where he is. I'll keep building. When he gets here, he'll see what I've done. He'll be proud. May 1948. Cabin's nearly done. Roof is solid. Stove installed. Just need him to see it. Still waiting. January 1949. 3 years since we made the plan. I know he's coming. Something must have delayed him. I'll wait as long as it takes. The entries became shorter, less frequent. But they never stopped. 1952, 1958, 1963, all the way to the 2000s. The final entry was dated March 14th, 2021, just 3 years ago. I'm 87 now. Hands don't work like they used to, but I keep this place ready. Keep it perfect, because a promise is a promise. Thomas, if you're out there, I'm still here, still waiting. Emma closed the journal, her eyes burning. Samuel had waited his entire life for a brother who never came. She looked around the cabin with new understanding. Every detail, every preserved item, every piece of firewood stacked just so. It was all an act of love, of faith, of a promise kept even when hope must have felt impossible. The wind howled outside, rattling the windows. The fire crackled. Emma was still alone, still lost, still terrified. But she wasn't just in a cabin anymore. She was inside someone's heart. The storm outside intensified. Through the small window, Emma could see nothing but white. Night was falling, or maybe the storm was just that thick. Either way, she wasn't going anywhere. She returned to the fireplace and added another log. The heat felt good against her face. Her clothes had started to dry, though her boots were still soaked. Her stomach growled. She hadn't eaten since breakfast, and that felt like a lifetime ago. She returned to the shelves and selected a can of soup. Chicken noodle. The label was dated 1994, but the can wasn't dented or rusted. She found a can opener in a drawer, opened it carefully, and sniffed. It smelled fine. Her grandfather had once told her that canned food could last decades if stored properly. She poured the soup into a pot she found hanging from a hook and set it on the grate over the fire. While it heated, she explored the loft. A wooden ladder led up to a small sleeping area. A mattress lay on the floor, covered with more wool blankets. A single window looked out over the forest, and on a small shelf, more photographs. Samuel and Thomas as boys, fishing by a stream. Samuel and Thomas in uniform, standing in front of a barracks. Samuel alone, older, maybe in his 30s, standing in front of this very cabin, holding a hammer. And dozens more. Samuel at 40, at 50, at 60, always alone, always at the cabin. In the later photos, his face was weathered, his hair white, his shoulders bent, but his eyes held the same expression in every single picture. Waiting. Emma climbed back down, her chest aching. The soup was hot. She ate it slowly, savoring the warmth, the saltiness, the way it made her feel a little less alone. After she finished, she washed the pot in the hand pump sink. The water was ice cold but clean. She dried everything and put it back exactly where she'd found it. Something about this place demanded respect. Outside, the storm raged. Inside, the fire burned. Emma pulled the wool blanket from the cot and wrapped it around herself, sitting cross-legged on the floor in front of the flames. She thought about her family. Her mum and dad and Jacob. They had to be looking for her, had to be terrified. Her mum was probably crying. Her dad was probably coordinating with rangers, organizing search parties. But in this storm, no one could search. No one could move. She was on her own until the weather broke. Emma looked at the journal again, sitting on the desk like a confession. Samuel had survived out here for decades, alone, waiting. If he could do it, she could survive a few days. She just had to be smart, calm, brave. The fire popped, sending sparks up the chimney. Emma pulled the blanket tighter and closed her eyes. "Thank you, Samuel," she whispered into the quiet, "for keeping this place ready, for waiting. I'll take care of it while I'm here. I promise." The cabin seemed to exhale around her, and for the first time since the storm had swallowed her whole, Emma felt something other than fear. She felt protected. By morning, the storm hadn't let up. If anything, it had gotten worse. Emma woke on the floor in front of the fireplace, the embers glowing faintly. Her neck was stiff, and her body ached from sleeping on the hard wood, but she was warm, alive. She sat up slowly, the blanket falling from her shoulders. Pale grey light filtered through the windows, though the snow was still falling in thick sheets. The wind hadn't stopped. It moaned around the cabin like something trying to get in. Emma stood and stretched, her stomach already growling again. She added wood to the fire, watching as the flames caught and grew. Then she returned to the shelves and found a can of peaches. Breakfast. She ate them straight from the can, the syrup sweet and almost too thick. But it was energy. It was something. After she finished, she cleaned the can and set it aside. Her grandfather had taught her to leave no trace, to respect the places you visit. This cabin was no different. She returned to the desk and opened the journal again, this time reading more carefully. The early entries were full of hope. Samuel wrote about the land, about the trees he'd felled, about the stone foundation he'd laid by hand. He described the view from the ridge, the way the sun hit the valley in the mornings. He wrote about Thomas constantly. Thomas always loved the mountains, said they made him feel small in a good way, like his problems couldn't reach him up here. When he gets back, we'll fish the creek. We'll hunt in the fall. We'll live the life we promised each other when things got dark overseas. But as the years went on, the entries changed. 1950. Went into town today, asked at the post office again. No one's heard from him. They looked at me like I was crazy. Maybe I am, but I can't give up. Not on him. 1955. I thought I saw him today, walking up the trail. My heart nearly stopped, but it was just a hiker passing through. He asked if I needed help. I said no. How do you explain you're waiting for a ghost? 1962. I know the truth now. Deep down I've always known. But I can't let go. This cabin is all I have left of him, of us. If I stop waiting, it means he's really gone, and I'm not ready for that. Emma's eyes blurred with tears. She wiped them away quickly and kept reading. The entries in the later years were shorter, sparser, but they never stopped. 1978. Roof needed patching, fixed it. Place is solid, still waiting. 1989. 50 years since we made the plan. I'm an old man now, but the cabin's still here, still ready. 2003. Doc says my heart's giving out. Don't care, I'll die here if I have to. At least then I'll be where I'm supposed to be, where we're supposed to be. The final entries were the hardest to read. 2019. Can't make the hike much anymore, but I come when I can. Keep the supplies stocked, keep the place clean. Someone will find this someday. I hope they understand. 2020. 86 years old. Outlived almost everyone I knew, but I kept my promise, Thomas. I kept it. 2021. This might be my last visit. Hands shake too much to write well, but I wanted to say it one more time. I waited, brother. I never stopped. And if there's anything after this, I'll see you there. Finally. Emma closed the journal and pressed it to her chest, tears streaming down her face. Samuel had died keeping a promise to a brother who never made it home. She set the journal down carefully and wiped her eyes. She looked around the cabin again, at the preserved perfection, the decades of devotion. This wasn't just shelter, it was a shrine, a testament, and somehow, impossibly, it had saved her. The day passed slowly. Emma kept the fire going, ate sparingly from the canned goods, and explored every corner of the cabin. She found more treasures, old tools, a compass, a military medal in a small box, a folded flag. She found maps, hand-drawn, showing trails and landmarks. She found receipts from town, dated decades apart, proof that Samuel had kept coming back year after year. And in a trunk beneath the loft, she found something that made her breath catch. Letters, dozens of them, still sealed, addressed to Samuel Winter, from the United States Army. Her hands shook as she picked one up. The postmark read, August 12, 1946. She opened it carefully. Dear Mr. Winter, we regret to inform you that your brother, Corporal Thomas Winter, was killed in a vehicular accident on October 3, 1946, while traveling to Colorado. He was honorably discharged and en route home. We extend our deepest condolences. His personal effects will be forwarded to you. Emma's hands trembled. The letter slipped from her fingers and fluttered to the floor. Samuel had known. The military had told him, had sent him proof, but he'd never opened the letters. She checked the others, all unopened, all from the same period. He'd refused to believe it, or maybe he'd believed it but couldn't accept it. So he'd built the cabin anyway, kept it perfect anyway, waited anyway, because the alternative, letting go, was worse than spending a lifetime hoping for a miracle. Emma sank to the floor, her back against the trunk, staring at the unopened letters scattered around her. What happens next will turn this night upside down, reveal a truth nobody expected, and remind us why sometimes the quietest voices carry the most power. Stay tuned to see what happens next. If you're enjoying the story, please like, share, and subscribe for more. The wind howled, the fire crackled. Emma sat in the silence, holding the weight of someone else's grief in her small hands. And for the first time she understood what her grandfather had meant when he said, "Some people don't survive by moving on. They survive by holding on." Samuel Winter had held on for 75 years, and his cabin, his promise, had just saved an 8-year-old girl lost in a blizzard. She didn't know it yet, but she was about to return the favor. The second night was harder than the first. Emma woke in darkness to the sound of wind tearing at the cabin's roof. The fire had died to ash, and the cold had crept back in like something living. She fumbled for the matches in the dark, her fingers numb, and managed to get the fire going again after 4 attempts. The flames cast dancing shadows across the walls, and she sat huddled under the wool blanket, watching them flicker and twist. She thought about her family, wondered if they were safe, wondered if they thought she was dead. The idea made her stomach twist, made tears burn hot behind her eyes. But she couldn't think like that. Her grandfather's voice came back to her, steady and sure. Fear is just your body trying to keep you alive, Emma. Listen to it, but don't let it drive. She fed the fire and waited for dawn. When pale light finally filtered through the windows, the storm was still raging. If anything, it had gotten worse. Snow was piled halfway up the glass, and the wind screamed like something furious. Emma stood at the window and pressed her hand against the cold pane. She couldn't see more than a few feet beyond the cabin. The world had vanished into white. She was trapped. Completely and utterly trapped. For a moment, panic clawed at her throat. But then she turned and looked at the cabin around her, at the supplies on the shelves, at the firewood stacked neatly by the hearth, at Samuel Winter's journal sitting on the desk. He'd survived out here alone for decades. She could survive a few more days. She made herself eat breakfast, another can of soup, heated over the fire. She rationed it carefully, eating only half and saving the rest for later. She didn't know how long she'd be here, and she needed to be smart. After she ate, she returned to the trunk beneath the loft. The unopened military letters lay scattered where she'd dropped them. She gathered them carefully and read each one. They all said the same thing in different words. Thomas Winter had been killed. October 3rd, 1946. A car accident in Virginia while traveling west to meet his brother. He'd survived the war, survived whatever horrors he'd faced overseas, only to die on a rural highway 77 miles from home. Emma's chest ached. She thought about Samuel receiving these letters and refusing to open them, choosing hope over certainty, choosing to wait rather than grieve. She understood it now. If you never opened the letter, the bad news couldn't be real. If you kept waiting, there was still a chance. And for Samuel, that chance had been worth more than the truth. She folded the letters carefully and placed them back in the trunk. Then she noticed something she'd missed before. A small metal lockbox wedged in the corner, hidden beneath a folded tarp. Emma pulled it out. It was heavy, made of steel, with a combination lock on the front. 3 numbers. She tried a few random combinations. Nothing. She thought about the dates she'd seen. 1943, 1946. She tried different variations, but the lock didn't budge. Then she remembered the carving on the mantel. Samuel Winter, 1943, waiting. She tried 1943. The lock clicked open. Emma's heart pounded as she lifted the lid. Inside, more letters. But these were different. These had been opened, read, folded and refolded until the creases were worn soft. She picked up the first one carefully. The handwriting was messier than the others, like it had been written in a hurry. Dear Sam, I know I've been writing you for months now, and I know you're getting tired of hearing me talk about the future when we're still stuck in this hell. But I need something to hold on to, brother. Last night was bad, real bad. I can't tell you details, they'd censor it anyway, but I need to know that when this is over, we're going to build that cabin. The one we talked about when we were kids. Remember? Up in the mountains where nobody could find us, where the world couldn't touch us. I'm holding on to that, Sam. It's the only thing keeping me sane. Promise me we'll do it. Promise me. Your brother, Thomas. The date at the top read March 22nd, 1944. Emma read the next letter, and the next. There were dozens of them, spanning from 1943 to 1946. All from Thomas, all talking about the cabin. He described it in detail, the location, the design, the life they'd built there. He talked about fishing and hunting and sitting on the porch watching the sunset. He talked about peace, about silence, about a place where the war couldn't reach them. And in every letter, he made Samuel promise. Promise they'd build it. Promise they wouldn't give up on the dream. Samuel had kept that promise, even after Thomas died, even after hope should have died with him. Samuel had built the cabin exactly as Thomas described, every detail, every board, every stone, not as a home, as a memorial, as proof that some promises are too sacred to break. Emma set the letters down, her vision blurred with tears. She wiped her eyes and looked deeper into the lockbox. Beneath the letters, she found medals, a purple heart, a bronze star, both engraved with Thomas Winter's name. There was a folded flag, the kind given to families at military funerals, and beneath that, a photograph. Thomas in his uniform, standing beside a jeep somewhere overseas. He looked tired, older than in the earlier photos, but he was smiling, and in his hand he held a small notebook. Emma turned the photo over. On the back, in Thomas's handwriting, "The cabin plans. Carrying them everywhere. Can't wait to start building. 1945. He'd carried the plans with him through the war, through the fighting, through everything, and he'd almost made it home to build it. Almost. Emma's hands shook as she placed everything back in the lockbox, but as she did, her fingers brushed against something else. A smaller box, tucked into the corner. Wood, not metal. Hand-carved. She pulled it out and opened it carefully. Inside was a single envelope, yellowed with age, sealed but never mailed. The address read, Samuel Winter, General Delivery, Coldwater Ridge, Colorado. But there was no stamp, no postmark, just Thomas's handwriting on the front and 4 words beneath the address. In case I don't make it. Emma's breath caught. This was the letter, the one Thomas had written before he died, the one he'd carried with him. She opened it with trembling fingers. The paper inside was thin, fragile. The ink had faded, but the words were still clear. Dear Sam, if you're reading this, then I didn't make it. I'm writing this in a motel in Virginia, 2 days from home, and I've got a bad feeling I can't shake. I know it's probably nothing. I know I'm probably being paranoid. But I need to say this just in case. Thank you for waiting for me. Thank you for believing I'd come home when everyone else gave up. I know it wasn't easy. I know you probably had people telling you to move on, to let go. But you didn't. You held on. And that meant everything. The cabin we talked about. I know we planned to build it together, but if something happens to me, I need you to build it anyway. Build it and live in it. Fill it with life and joy and all the things we dreamed about. Don't let my death stop you from living, Sam. Promise me. Because here's the truth I never told you. The reason I held on during the war, the reason I survived when so many others didn't, it wasn't just the dream of the cabin. It was knowing you were waiting for me. You were my anchor, brother, my reason. And if I don't make it home, I need you to know that. I need you to know you saved my life 100 times over just by being there. So build the cabin, live the life, and don't wait for me if I don't show up. Let me go. Be happy. That's all I ever wanted for you. Your brother always, Thomas. Emma read the letter 3 times before she could see through her tears. Samuel had never read this, had never known Thomas wanted him to let go, to move on, to live. Instead, he'd waited. For 75 years, he'd waited. She folded the letter carefully and held it against her chest. The weight of it felt enormous. This wasn't just paper and ink. This was a goodbye that had never been delivered, a release that had never been granted. Samuel had died not knowing his brother wanted him to be free. The storm outside howled, shaking the windows. But inside, Emma sat in silence, holding the letter, understanding now the full tragedy of the cabin around her. It wasn't just a memorial. It was a prison, a beautiful, devoted prison built from love and grief, and a promise that should have been broken. She stood slowly and walked to the mantel. The carving stared back at her. Samuel Winter, 1943, waiting. "You can stop waiting now," she whispered. "He wanted you to stop." The cabin didn't answer. Just the fire crackling and the wind screaming. Emma placed Thomas's final letter on the mantel, leaning it against the carved wood. It belonged there, with Samuel's name, with the promise. Maybe Samuel's spirit, wherever it was, could finally read it, finally understand, finally rest. She turned away, wiping her eyes, and noticed something else she'd missed. A small door built into the wall beneath the loft stairs, easy to overlook, almost invisible in the shadows. She approached it cautiously. There was no lock, just a simple latch. She lifted it and pulled the door open. Inside was a narrow space, barely big enough to crawl into, and stacked floor to ceiling were journals, dozens of them, different sizes, different colors, different years. Emma pulled out the first one. The cover read, 1947. She opened it and began to read. January 1st, 1947. New Year. Thomas has been gone 3 months now officially, though I didn't open the letters until yesterday. I couldn't anymore. My hands shook so bad I could barely turn the pages. He died in October. October 3rd. He was 77 miles away. 77 miles from here. From me. From the cabin we were supposed to build together. I keep thinking, if I'd gone to meet him, if I'd driven east instead of waiting here like an idiot, maybe I could have stopped it. Maybe I could have convinced him to rest another day. Maybe he'd still be alive. But I didn't. I waited, like always. And now he's gone. The cabin's half finished. I should tear it down, burn it. It's a monument to a dream that died on a highway in Virginia. But I can't. My hands won't let me. So I'll finish it instead. Not for us. For him. Because he deserved to see it completed. He deserved that much. Emma read entry after entry, year after year. Samuel's grief poured out onto the pages in handwriting that grew shakier as the decades passed. 1950. 10 years since we made the plan. 4 years since he died. The cabin's done. Perfect. Just like we drew it. But it's empty. I come here on weekends, keep it maintained, but I can't live in it. It doesn't feel right. It was supposed to be ours. 1963. 20 years. People in town think I'm crazy. Maybe I am. But this place is all I have left of him. If I let it go, if I stop coming, then he's really gone. And I'm not ready for that. I'll never be ready for that. 1978. I'm 60 now. My back hurts. My knees don't work right. But I still make the hike. Still keep the place stocked. Still wait. I know he's not coming. I've known for 32 years. But waiting gives me purpose. And purpose is all I've got. 1991. 73 years old. The doctors say I should stop making the trip. Too dangerous for a man my age. But what else am I going to do? Sit in town and wait to die? At least here, I'm doing something. I'm keeping a promise. That has to count for something. 2008. 90 years old. I don't know how I'm still alive. Everyone I knew is dead. Thomas has been gone longer than he was alive. But I keep coming. The cabin's still perfect. Still waiting. Maybe I'm waiting for myself now. Waiting to join him. The final journal was dated 2021. The handwriting was barely legible, shaky and faint. March 14th, 2021. I'm 87. This is probably my last trip. I can barely make the hike anymore. Took me 6 hours today, and I had to stop every few minutes. But I made it. The cabin's still here. Still perfect. I stocked the shelves one last time. Made sure everything's in order. If someone finds this place after I'm gone, I hope they understand. I wasn't crazy. I was devoted. There's a difference. Thomas, if you're out there somewhere, if there's anything after this life, I'll see you soon. And we'll finally build that cabin together. The right way, with both of us there. I love you, brother. I never stopped. Samuel. Emma closed the journal, her face wet with tears. She looked around the cabin with new eyes. Every board, every nail, every carefully placed jar on the shelf. It was all an act of love so profound it had lasted beyond death. Samuel had known Thomas was gone, had known for 75 years, but he'd kept waiting anyway because the waiting itself was the point. The devotion was the point. The refusal to let go was how he'd kept his brother alive. And now, impossibly, that devotion had saved her life. She sat on the floor surrounded by journals, understanding something her 8-year-old mind could barely grasp. Love didn't always make sense. Sometimes it was irrational, sometimes it was painful. Sometimes it looked like an old man hiking 6 hours through the mountains to maintain a cabin no one would ever live in. But it was still love. And love, even when it hurt, was never wasted. The storm outside showed no signs of stopping. Emma was on her 3rd day in the cabin, and her family still had no idea where she was. But she wasn't panicking anymore. She was surviving, and she was learning. She explored every inch of the cabin, reading every journal, studying every photograph. She learned that Samuel had worked as a mechanic in town, that he'd never married, that he'd spent every spare moment and every spare dollar maintaining the cabin. She learned that people had tried to help him, friends, neighbors, even a woman who'd wanted to marry him. But he'd turned them all away. The cabin was his purpose, his penance, his promise. And he'd kept it until the day he died. Emma found his death certificate tucked into the final journal. May 2nd, 2021. Heart failure. He'd died 2 months after his last visit to the cabin. The cabin had been abandoned for 3 years. But it didn't look abandoned. It looked loved. Because Samuel had prepared it so well that even 3 years of emptiness couldn't erase his presence. On the 4th day, Emma woke to silence. Not the howling silence of the storm, but real silence. She sat up, her heart racing, and ran to the window. The snow had stopped. The sky was clear, pale blue and endless. The sun was rising over the mountains, painting everything gold. She could see for miles. The forest stretched out below, blanketed in white. It was the most beautiful thing she'd ever seen. But it was also terrifying, because now she had a choice: stay in the cabin and wait for rescue, or try to find her way back. She stood at the window for a long time, thinking. Her grandfather had taught her to stay put when lost. "Make yourself easy to find," he'd said. "Don't wander." But she'd been gone 4 days. Her family was probably frantic, and she had no idea if anyone knew about this cabin, if they were even searching in this direction. She looked around the cabin one last time, at the journals, at the photographs, at Thomas's letter still resting on the mantel. Then she made a decision. She would try to signal for help, but she wouldn't leave. Not yet. The cabin had saved her life. She owed it more than abandonment. She went through the supplies and found what she was looking for: a mirror, small, hand-held, still polished. She took it outside into the blinding white snow. The cold hit her like a fist, but the sun was bright. Perfect for what she needed. She climbed onto the roof, using a ladder she found leaning against the back wall. Her hands shook from cold and fear, but she made it to the peak. From there she could see for miles, the valley below, the ridge above, the forest in every direction. She angled the mirror toward the sun and began flashing. 3 short flashes, 3 long, 3 short. SOS. Her grandfather had taught her that too. She did it over and over, sweeping the mirror across the horizon, hoping someone, somewhere would see. She didn't know if it would work, didn't know if anyone was even looking, but she had to try. After an hour, her hands were numb and her lips were blue. She climbed down carefully and went back inside. The fire had died, and she rebuilt it with shaking fingers. She would try again in the afternoon. And again the next day, as many times as it took. She made herself lunch, eating carefully, rationing what was left. She had maybe 3 more days of food if she was smart. After that, she'd have to figure something else out. But she wouldn't think about that now. Now she would rest, warm up, and then try again. She sat by the fire, wrapped in the wool blanket, and picked up Samuel's final journal one more time. She read the last entry again, feeling the weight of his words. "I love you, brother. I never stopped." Emma made a decision. If she got out of here, If she was rescued, she would tell Samuel's story. She would make sure people knew what he'd done, how he'd waited, how he'd loved, how his devotion had saved a little girl's life 80 years after he'd carved his name into the mantle. She would make sure he wasn't forgotten. The afternoon came and Emma climbed back onto the roof. She flashed the mirror again, over and over, until her arms ached. No response, no sign of anyone. She climbed down and went back inside. The 5th day passed the same way. Flash the mirror, wait, rest, ration food, read the journals. She learned more about Samuel than she'd ever known about anyone. His favorite food was apple pie. He'd wanted to be a pilot but failed the vision test. He'd been scared during the war but never told Thomas. He'd dreamed of having kids someday but couldn't imagine it without his brother alive to be an uncle. He'd lived a half-life, always waiting, always devoted, always alone. On the 6th day, Emma's food ran out. She found a jar of pickles she'd missed before and ate 3, saving the rest. She melted snow for water and drank it slowly. Her family would be frantic by now. She'd been gone almost a week. They probably thought she was dead. The thought made her cry, but she pushed it away. She couldn't afford to break down. Not now. She climbed onto the roof again and flashed the mirror. The sun was bright. The sky was clear. Someone had to see. Someone had to be looking. She flashed until her arms gave out. Then she climbed down and collapsed inside by the fire. That night she slept fitfully. She dreamed of Samuel and Thomas, of 2 brothers building a cabin together in some place beyond this world, of them finally at peace. When she woke on the 7th day, something had changed. She felt it before she even opened her eyes. The sound of an engine, distant but real. A helicopter. Emma's eyes flew open. She scrambled to the window. There, in the distance, a black dot moving across the sky. Search and rescue. She ran outside without her coat, without her boots, screaming and waving her arms. The helicopter was too far away. They couldn't hear her. She ran back inside, grabbed the mirror, and climbed onto the roof so fast she nearly fell. Her hands shook as she angled it toward the sun. Flash, 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 long, 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 flash, 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 over and over. Please see me, please. The helicopter continued its pattern, sweeping across the valley. Then it turned, banked left, started moving toward her. Emma's heart nearly exploded. She kept flashing, kept signaling. The helicopter came closer, closer, until she could see the pilot, see the rescue crew. One of them pointed at her. They'd seen her. They'd found her. Emma dropped the mirror and collapsed on the roof, sobbing. Relief flooded through her so powerfully she couldn't stand. She just sat there, crying, shaking, as the helicopter circled and began to descend into the clearing beyond the cabin. She'd survived. She was going home. But before she climbed down, before she ran toward rescue, she looked back at the cabin one last time. At the sturdy walls, at the smoke curling from the chimney, at Samuel Winter's promise made real. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you for waiting. Thank you for keeping this place ready. You saved me." The helicopter blades kicked up snow and voices called her name. Emma climbed down from the roof and ran toward them, toward safety, toward her family. But she carried something with her. Thomas's letter, Samuel's final journal, the photograph of 2 brothers. Because some promises are too important to leave behind, and some stories are too precious to let fade into silence. Emma had found more than shelter in that cabin. She'd found purpose, and she wasn't about to let it go. The rescue crew wrapped Emma in thermal blankets and lifted her into the helicopter. She clutched Samuel's journal and Thomas's letter against her chest like they were made of gold. The pilot, a man named Richards with kind eyes and a graying beard, knelt beside her. "You're okay now, sweetheart. You're safe. Can you tell me your name?" "Emma Hartford," she managed through chattering teeth. "I'm 8. "Well, Emma Hartford, you're one lucky little girl. We've been searching for 7 days. Your family's been out of their minds." 7 days. She'd survived 7 days in the wilderness. At 8 years old, the helicopter lifted off, and Emma watched the cabin shrink below her. From the air, it looked so small, so insignificant. just a dark speck in an endless sea of white. But she knew better. That cabin was a universe, a love story, a tragedy, a miracle. "Wait," she said suddenly, turning to Richards. "The cabin? Whose is it?" He glanced at the coordinates on his GPS. "That old place? Far as I know, it's been abandoned for years. County records show it belonged to a Samuel Winter, but he died back in 2021. No heirs, no will. It's just been sitting there." Emma's chest tightened. No heirs. No one to carry on the story. No one to know what Samuel had done. "We need to protect it," she said urgently. "It's important. It saved my life." Richard smiled gently. "We'll make sure it's documented in the report, sweetheart. Right now, let's get you to your family." 20 minutes later, the helicopter touched down at a ranger station. Emma barely had time to unbuckle before the door flew open and her mother was there, sobbing, pulling her into a hug so tight Emma couldn't breathe. Oh God, Emma, baby, we thought we lost you." Her father was right behind, his face haggard, eyes red from crying. Jacob stood back, trying to look tough, but his chin was trembling. "I'm okay," Emma kept saying. "I'm okay. I'm okay." But her mother wouldn't let go, just held her and cried and stroked her hair and whispered thank you to God and the universe and anyone who might be listening. They took Emma to the hospital, checked her for frostbite, hypothermia, malnutrition. She was dehydrated and had lost 4 pounds, but otherwise she was fine. Remarkably fine, the doctors said, like someone had been taking care of her. "The cabin," Emma kept trying to explain. "There was food, and firewood, and journals. Samuel Winter kept it ready. He waited his whole life, and it saved me." Her parents exchanged glances, the kind adults give each other when a child says something that doesn't quite make sense. "Sweetheart," her father said gently, "you were very brave. You survived on your own. You should be proud." "No," Emma insisted. "I wasn't alone. Samuel was there. His supplies, his knowledge, everything he left behind." Her mother squeezed her hand. "We're just glad you're safe, baby." But Emma could see they didn't understand. To them, it was just luck. Just an abandoned building that happened to have supplies. They didn't see the devotion, the decades of preparation, the love that had transcended death to save a stranger. That night, alone in her hospital room, Emma pulled out Samuel's journal and Thomas's letter. She'd hidden them under her shirt when the paramedics weren't looking. She opened the journal to a random page and began to read. July 9th, 1973. Replaced the roof shingles today. Took me 3 days, but it's solid now. Good for another 20 years at least. I was thinking about Thomas while I worked, wondering what he'd say if he could see me. Probably tell me I'm crazy. Tell me to get a life. But this is my life, this cabin, this promise. It's all I've got and it's enough. Some people need a lot to be happy. I just need to know I kept my word. Emma read until her eyes grew heavy. Then she tucked the journal under her pillow and fell asleep. She stayed in the hospital for 2 days. During that time, reporters came. The story of the 8-year-old girl who survived a week in a blizzard was making headlines. Local news wanted interviews. National outlets called. But Emma refused to talk to anyone until she could tell the whole story. Not just her survival, but Samuel's. Not just the 7 days, but the 75 years. On the 3rd day, they let her go home. Her family's hotel room felt strange after the cabin. Too warm, too bright, too full of voices and television noise and people asking if she was okay. She wasn't okay. She was changed. The cabin had marked her in ways she couldn't explain. Ways she wouldn't understand for years. That night, she sat at the small desk in the hotel room and wrote everything she could remember. Every detail of the cabin. Every entry from Samuel's journals. Every word from Thomas's letter. She wrote until her hand cramped, afraid that if she didn't capture it now, she'd forget. And forgetting felt like a betrayal. 2 weeks later, back home in Denver, Emma's grandfather came to visit. Frank was 78, tall and weathered, with hands that had spent a lifetime working outdoors. He'd been the one who taught Emma about survival, about staying calm in emergencies, about fire and shelter and rationing food. He sat on the edge of her bed while she showed him the journal and the letter. "I read about your rescue," he said quietly, "but I didn't know about all this." Emma told him everything. About the journals, about the unopened military letters, about Samuel waiting for 75 years for a brother who died 77 miles from home. Frank listened without interrupting. When she finished, he was quiet for a long moment. "That man saved your life," he finally said. "I know." Not just with his supplies, with his knowledge, his preparation. Everything he did for 75 years, he was preparing for you. He just didn't know it. Emma felt tears prick her eyes. "Do you think he'd be happy? That the cabin finally helped someone?" Frank smiled. "I think he'd be honored. You were worth waiting for, Emma." They sat in silence for a while. Then Frank spoke again. "What are you going to do now?" "I don't know," Emma admitted. "But I can't just let this disappear. Samuel's story deserves to be told." "Then tell it," Frank said simply. "You're the only one who can." Over the next month, Emma became obsessed with learning everything she could about Samuel and Thomas Winter. She searched online archives, contacted the National Archives for military records, reached out to the Coldwater Ridge Historical Society. What she found broke her heart and healed it at the same time. Thomas Winter had enlisted in 1942 at age 19. He'd served in the European theatre, earned a Bronze Star for valor during the Battle of the Bulge, and been wounded twice. He'd been honorably discharged in September 1946 and started driving west in early October. The accident happened on October 3, 1946, on Route 33 in Virginia. A drunk driver crossed the center line. Thomas died instantly. He was 23 years old. Samuel Winter had been waiting for him at a boarding house in Coldwater Ridge. When the military notified him, he'd refused to believe it at first, refused to open the letters, refused to accept the death certificate. Instead, he'd taken every penny he had and bought land in the mountains. The exact location Thomas had described in his letters. And he'd built the cabin alone over the next 3 years, exactly as they'd planned it. He'd worked as a mechanic in town to pay for supplies, never married, never had children, spent every weekend and every vacation at the cabin, maintaining it, improving it, waiting. The Historical Society had a few photographs of him. Emma stared at them for hours. Samuel at 30, standing in front of the half-built cabin. Samuel at 50, grey starting to show in his hair. Samuel at 70, bent but still strong. In every photograph, his eyes held the same expression, distant, devoted, waiting. Emma also found records of people who'd tried to help him. A woman named Dorothy who'd loved him in the 1950s, friends who'd offered to hike with him, a niece who'd begged him to move closer to family. He'd declined them all, politely but firmly. The cabin was his responsibility, his purpose. One article from the local newspaper, dated March 1998, quoted him, "People think I'm waiting for a ghost. Maybe I am, but that ghost kept me alive when I should have died, and I owe him everything. This cabin is my way of paying that debt." Emma read the article 3 times, memorizing every word. She started giving interviews, first to the local Denver News, then to larger outlets. She told Samuel's story alongside her own, about the devoted brother who'd waited 75 years, about the promise that had transcended death, about the love that had saved her life. The story went viral. Within days, it was everywhere. News websites, social media, morning talk shows. People were moved by the tragedy of it, the beauty of it, the impossible devotion of one man to a brother long dead. But not everyone understood. Some people called Samuel obsessed, mentally ill, unhealthy. They said he'd wasted his life on a fantasy. Emma read those comments and felt fury rise in her chest. They didn't understand. They hadn't sat in that cabin and felt the presence of love so strong it had lasted 8 decades. They hadn't read the journals, hadn't seen the care in every preserved detail. She wrote a response that her mother helped her post online. Samuel Winter didn't waste his life. He spent it keeping a promise, That promise saved my life. Love isn't waste. Devotion isn't illness. And waiting for someone you love, even when the world tells you it's pointless, that's the bravest thing a person can do. Samuel Winter was a hero, and I'm going to make sure everyone knows it. The post got shared 40,000 times in 2 days. Then the emails started coming. From veterans who understood about brothers lost in war. From people who'd lost siblings and couldn't let go. From anyone who'd ever made a promise they couldn't break. One email in particular stuck with Emma. It was from a 92-year-old veteran named Robert Chen who'd served with Thomas Winter. "I remember Thomas," he wrote. "Good kid, brave, talked about his brother constantly, about the cabin they were going to build. We all thought he'd make it. We were happy for him when he got his discharge. Finding out he died so close to home, that broke us. But knowing his brother built that cabin anyway, that honored him for 75 years, that heals something I didn't know was still broken. Thank you for telling this story. Thomas would have wanted it told." Emma printed the email and added it to the growing folder of Samuel and Thomas materials she was collecting. 3 months after her rescue, a lawyer named Margaret Oakes contacted Emma's family. She specialized in estate law and historical preservation. "I've been following your daughter's story," she told Emma's parents. "And I did some research. Samuel Winter's estate was never properly settled. The cabin and land legally belong to the county, but they've taken no action on it. With the right petition, it could be preserved, maybe even turned into something meaningful." Emma's father looked skeptical. "Like what?" "A memorial, a retreat, a place that honors what Samuel built and continues his legacy." Emma, sitting at the kitchen table doing homework, looked up. "Could we really do that?" Margaret smiled. "With enough community support and the right documentation, yes." "Then let's do it," Emma said immediately. Her parents exchanged glances again, the kind that said this is a lot for an 8-year-old. But Frank, who'd been visiting again, spoke up. "The girl survived a week in the wilderness because of that cabin. If she wants to honor it, we should help her." That was how the Samuel Winter Memorial Project began. It started small. Emma and her grandfather went back to the cabin with Margaret Oakes and a county representative. It was June, and the snow had melted. The forest was green and alive, birds singing, wildflowers blooming in the meadow around the cabin. Emma stood in front of the door and felt her throat tighten. She hadn't been back since the rescue. Part of her was afraid it would be different, that the magic would be gone. But when Margaret opened the door, everything was exactly as Emma remembered. The fireplace, the table, the cot, the shelves lined with supplies. It was still waiting. Emma walked to the mantel and touched the carved letters. Samuel Winter, 1943, waiting. "He stopped waiting," she whispered. "He can rest now." They spent the day documenting everything, taking photographs, inventorying supplies, reading journals. Margaret was meticulous, treating each item like the treasure it was. "This is remarkable," she kept saying. "Truly remarkable. The level of preservation, the documentation, the story behind it. This could be one of the most significant historical sites in the state." The county representative, a man named Tom Berkeley, was less enthusiastic. "It's a nice story, but the county doesn't have funds for this kind of project. We can't justify the expense." "Then we'll raise the money," Emma said firmly. Tom looked at her with surprise. "You're what, 9 years old?" 8.5, Emma corrected. "And Samuel waited 75 years. I can do fundraising." Frank smiled. Margaret looked impressed. Tom just shook his head. "Good luck, kid." But Emma didn't need luck. She had something better. She had a story people couldn't forget. She started a website with her parents' help. The Samuel Winter Memorial Project. She posted photographs of the cabin, excerpts from the journals, the story of 2 brothers and a promise that lasted 8 decades. She set up a donation page with a goal of $50,000, enough to purchase the land from the county, do basic repairs, and create a small endowment for maintenance. Within a week, they'd raised $12,000. Within a month, they'd hit $30,000. People donated from all over the country. Veterans organizations, historical societies, families who'd lost loved ones in war, people who'd read the story and been moved. Emma received letters and emails every day. People sharing their own stories of loss and devotion, of promises kept, of love that refused to die. One letter came from a woman in Oregon whose husband had died in Iraq. "He used to talk about the house we'd build together," she wrote. "I never built it. I was too sad. But reading about Samuel, I realized maybe building it anyway would honor him more than abandoning the dream. Thank you for showing me that." Emma read that letter to her family at dinner and cried. Her mother hugged her. "You're doing something important, baby. Something that matters." By September, they'd raised $78,000, more than enough to purchase the land and begin preservation. The county agreed to sell. Margaret Oakes helped them establish a non-profit, and Frank, who'd been a park ranger for 40 years, volunteered to oversee the restoration. "This is the most important thing I've ever been part of," he told Emma. "And I've done a lot in my life." The work began in October, exactly 1 year after Thomas Winter had died on that Virginia highway. Emma and her family made the drive to Coldwater Ridge to be there for the groundbreaking ceremony. It was a small gathering, maybe 30 people, local historical society members, a few veterans, Margaret Oakes and her team, Tom Berkeley from the county, who'd become a surprising ally once he'd seen the community response, and Robert Chen, the 92-year-old veteran who'd served with Thomas. He'd traveled from California to be there. Emma met him as he stepped carefully out of his daughter's car. He was frail, leaning on a walker, but his eyes were sharp and kind. "You're Emma," he said. "Yes, sir." He smiled. "Thomas would have liked you. You've got his stubborn streak." Emma felt her chest swell with pride. "Tell me about him." They walked slowly toward the cabin, Robert leaning on his walker, Emma matching his pace. "He was the kind of guy who never gave up," Robert said. "No matter how bad things got, he always had this plan. The cabin, his brother, the life he was going to build. It kept him going when the rest of us were ready to quit." He paused, looking at the cabin. "I always wondered what happened to Samuel. If he'd moved on, built a family. Now I know." "He never moved on," Emma said quietly, "but I don't think that was wrong." Robert nodded. "No, it wasn't wrong. It was love, and love gets to look however it needs to." The ceremony was simple. Margaret Oakes spoke about preservation and history. Tom Berkeley read a proclamation from the county. Frank talked about the importance of honoring those who came before us. Then Emma stepped forward. She'd prepared something, written it out and practiced it a dozen times. But standing there in front of the cabin, the words felt wrong, too rehearsed, too small for what this place meant, so she spoke from her heart instead. Samuel Winter waited 75 years for his brother. People think that's sad. Maybe it is, but it's also beautiful, because Samuel never gave up on love. He never gave up on Thomas. And because of that, because he kept this cabin perfect, I'm alive today. I get to go to school and play with my friends and grow up, all because Samuel Winter refused to break a promise. Her voice cracked, but she kept going. This cabin isn't just about the past. It's about what we choose to carry forward, about the promises we keep even when they're hard, about loving people even after they're gone. Samuel taught me that, and I'm going to spend the rest of my life making sure other people learn it too. She pulled Thomas's letter from her pocket, the one Samuel had never read, the one that said, "Let me go." Samuel never got to read this, Emma said. But I think, wherever he is, he knows now. He knows Thomas wanted him to be happy, to live, and maybe, finally, he can. She placed the letter on the mantel, next to the carved words, where it belonged. The small crowd applauded. Some people were crying. Robert Chen saluted. Emma stepped back and looked at the cabin, at the promise made real, at the love that had saved her. She was only 8 years old, but she understood something most adults never learned. The best way to honor the dead isn't to let go. It's to carry forward what they taught us, to keep the promises they couldn't keep, to love as fiercely as they loved. Samuel Winter had taught her that, and she would never forget. Over the next few months, the cabin was carefully restored. Not renovated, restored. Every original detail was preserved. The journals were archived in climate-controlled cases. The photographs were displayed. Thomas's medals were mounted with his letters, but they also added new elements. A small museum room in an addition built behind the cabin. Solar panels on the roof to power lights and heat. A trail with markers explaining the history. Benches where visitors could sit and reflect. And most importantly, a guest book, where people could write their own stories of promises kept and love that endured. The Samuel Winter Memorial Cabin opened to the public in May, 18 months after Emma's rescue. Thousands of people came that first year, veterans, families, school groups, people who'd read the story and wanted to see the place where devotion had become legend. Emma visited as often as she could, sometimes with her family, sometimes with just her grandfather. She loved walking the trails, sitting in the cabin, reading the guest book entries. One entry, written by a teenager, stuck with her. My dad died when I was 6. I barely remember him. But coming here, seeing what Samuel did for Thomas, it makes me think maybe I should remember him better. Maybe I should carry him forward instead of trying to forget. Thank you for showing me that's possible. Emma read that entry and understood. The cabin wasn't just a memorial anymore. It was a healing place, a reminder that grief and love aren't opposites. They're two sides of the same promise. By the time Emma turned 10, the cabin had become a pilgrimage site. People came from across the country to see it, to feel the presence of devotion so strong it had transcended death. And Emma, the girl who'd been saved by a promise made 80 years before she was born, became its keeper, its voice, its living connection to the past. She gave tours, told stories, answered questions, and every time someone asked if Samuel had wasted his life, she gave the same answer. He saved mine. That's not a waste, that's a miracle. Because some promises are worth keeping, even when they hurt, even when the world doesn't understand, even when you wait 75 years for someone who's never coming back. Samuel Winter had taught her that, and she would spend the rest of her life teaching others. The cabin stood waiting. But not anymore. Now it was alive. Now it was purpose. Now it was proof that love, real love, never really dies. It just waits for the right person to carry it forward. And Emma Hartford had been that person all along. 5 years had passed since Emma Hartford stumbled through a blizzard and found shelter in Samuel Winter's cabin. She was 13 now, tall for her age, with the same gap-toothed smile, but eyes that held something older. Something earned. The cabin had changed her life. But what most people didn't know was that she'd changed the cabin's life too. It was early June when Emma stood in front of Coldwater Ridge Elementary School, addressing a gymnasium full of students, teachers, and parents. She'd given this presentation dozens of times, but it never got easier. Telling Samuel's story always felt sacred, like she was carrying something fragile that could break if she wasn't careful. Samuel Winter was 23 years old when his brother Thomas died, Emma began, her voice steady despite the nerves dancing in her stomach. He spent the next 75 years waiting for him anyway. People think that's crazy, but I think it's the most beautiful thing I've ever heard. She clicked to the next slide, a photograph of the cabin, snow-covered, exactly as she'd found it. This cabin saved my life when I was 8, but it did something else too. It taught me that love doesn't have an expiration date, that promises matter, that one person's devotion can echo across generations and touch people they'll never meet. A hand went up in the audience. A boy, maybe 10 years old. Did you ever get scared in there, being alone for 7 days? Emma nodded. Every single day, every night. But I wasn't really alone. Samuel's journals taught me how to survive. His supplies kept me fed. His firewood kept me warm. He'd been gone for 3 years, but he was still taking care of me. That's what love does. It outlasts us. After the presentation, people lined up to talk to her, to thank her, to share their own stories of loss and promises kept. An elderly woman gripped Emma's hand with trembling fingers. My husband died in Vietnam. 1968. I never remarried. People say I should have moved on, but reading about Samuel, I realize I didn't waste my life either. I kept my promise too, and that's okay. Emma squeezed her hand back. It's more than okay. It's beautiful. A middle-aged man approached next, eyes red. My son died 2 years ago. Car accident. He was 17. I can't go into his room. Can't touch his things. Everyone says I need to let go, but I can't. Does that make me like Samuel? Emma felt tears prick her own eyes. It makes you a father who loves his son. There's no timeline for grief. Samuel taught me that. These conversations happened everywhere Emma went. The story of the cabin had touched something deep in people. A nerve they didn't know was exposed. It gave them permission to grieve loudly, to love stubbornly, to refuse to let go when the world demanded it. But the cabin itself needed more than just a story. It needed protection, funding, a future. That's where things got complicated. The memorial had been open for 4 years, but it was struggling. Donations had slowed. Maintenance costs were rising. The non-profit board was talking about reducing hours, cutting programs, maybe even closing certain sections. Emma wouldn't let that happen. She'd started speaking at fundraisers, writing grants, reaching out to veterans organizations. Her parents worried she was taking on too much, that she was letting the cabin consume her life the way it had consumed Samuel's. But Emma didn't see it that way. This wasn't obsession, it was purpose. One evening in late July, Emma sat in her bedroom surrounded by papers, grant applications, donor lists, budget spreadsheets. She was 13 years old and running a non-profit campaign. Her mother knocked softly and entered carrying hot chocolate. "Baby, it's 11:30. You have soccer practice tomorrow." "I know, I just need to finish this application. It's due at midnight." Sarah sat on the edge of the bed. "Emma, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest." Emma looked up, sensing the seriousness in her mother's tone. "Are you doing this because you want to, or because you feel like you owe Samuel something?" Emma set down her pen. "Both. Is that wrong?" "No," Sarah said carefully, "but I don't want you to lose your childhood trying to preserve his. You survived something incredible. You honored him by telling his story. You don't have to sacrifice everything to keep the cabin alive." "But what if I'm the only one who can?" Emma asked, her voice small. "What if I stop, and it all falls apart, and everything Samuel did was for nothing?" Sarah pulled her into a hug. "Samuel's life wasn't for nothing. He saved you. That alone makes everything he did matter. You don't have to save the cabin to validate his existence. He already did that himself." Emma leaned into her mother's shoulder, feeling the weight she'd been carrying shift slightly. "But I want to save it," she whispered. "Not because I have to, because it deserves to be saved." Sarah kissed the top of her head. "Then we'll help you. But you have to let us. You can't do this alone." The next morning, Emma's parents made calls. They reached out to their network, to companies they'd worked with, to friends who had resources. Within a week, they'd organized a meeting with a potential major donor. His name was Richard Castellano, a real estate developer who'd lost his brother in Afghanistan. He'd read Emma's story and wanted to meet her. They met at a coffee shop in Denver. Richard was in his 50s, successful, wearing an expensive suit, but with kind eyes that reminded Emma of her grandfather. "I lost my brother Marcus 12 years ago," he said after they'd ordered. IED in Kandahar. He was 26. I was 31. I thought I'd processed it, moved on, done all the things you're supposed to do, but then I read about Samuel Winter and I realized I'd just buried it, pretended it didn't hurt anymore. Emma listened, hands wrapped around her hot chocolate. "The cabin you're preserving, it's not just about Samuel and Thomas. It's about all of us who've lost someone and don't know how to carry them forward. That's why I want to help." He slid a folder across the table. Inside was a check. Emma's eyes widened. $100,000. "This is too much," she stammered. "It's not enough," Richard said. "But it's a start. Use it to expand the programs, to bring in more veterans, to create something lasting." Emma felt tears stream down her face. Why are you doing this? Richard smiled sadly. Because Marcus would have loved that cabin, would have understood what Samuel did. And if I can't bring my brother back, at least I can help other people honor theirs. The donation changed everything. With it, they could fund programs for 2 years, hire staff, expand the retreat center, create scholarships for veterans' families to visit. But more importantly, it sparked something bigger. Other donors came forward. Veterans organizations pledged support. The governor announced a state grant. By September, they had enough funding to not just preserve the cabin, but to transform it into something Samuel and Thomas would have been proud of. The new plans were ambitious. The original cabin would remain untouched, a museum and memorial exactly as Emma had found it. But around it, they would build additional structures. Small retreat cabins for veterans dealing with PTSD and grief. A community center for workshops and group therapy. Trails for hiking and reflection. They would call it the Winter Brothers Healing Sanctuary. Emma worked closely with the architects and planners, making sure every detail honored Samuel's vision. The new cabins were built in the same style as the original. The trails followed paths Samuel had walked. The community center featured walls covered with his journals and Thomas's letters. Nothing was done carelessly. Everything carried meaning. In March, a film crew from a national news network came to document the progress. They interviewed Emma, now 14, walking through the construction site. "Why is this so important to you?" the reporter asked. Emma stopped in front of the original cabin, its door still bearing Samuel's carved initials. Because Samuel spent 75 years teaching a lesson the world needs. That love isn't weakness. That devotion isn't waste. That keeping promises, even impossible ones, is what makes us human. She turned to the camera. If this place can help even one person feel less alone in their grief, then every hour I've spent on it is worth it. The segment aired in April. Within days, the Winter Brothers Healing Sanctuary had a waiting list of 300 veterans wanting to visit. The grand opening was scheduled for October 3rd, exactly 79 years after Thomas Winter died on that Virginia highway. Exactly 6 years after Emma had stumbled into the cabin that saved her life. The week before the opening, Emma couldn't sleep. She kept thinking about Samuel, wondering if he could somehow see what his cabin had become, wondering if he'd approve. She walked into her parents' bedroom at 2 in the morning. Her father woke immediately, always the light sleeper. "Emma, what's wrong?" "Do you think we're doing the right thing, changing the cabin like this? What if Samuel wouldn't have wanted it?" Her father sat up, rubbing his eyes. "Come here." Emma climbed onto the bed, feeling younger than 14. Her mother stirred and wrapped an arm around her. "Samuel spent his whole life maintaining one cabin for one person," her father said gently. "You're creating a sanctuary for thousands. You're taking his devotion and multiplying it, making it bigger than he ever could have alone. That's not betrayal. That's legacy." "But what if I'm doing it for the wrong reasons?" Emma whispered. "What if I'm just trying to make myself feel better about surviving when he died?" Her mother pulled her closer. "Baby, you survived because Samuel prepared that cabin. You're honoring him because his sacrifice mattered. There's nothing wrong with those reasons. They're beautiful." Emma closed her eyes, feeling the weight lift slightly. "I just want him to be proud." "He is," her father said with certainty. "Wherever he is, whatever happens after we die, he's proud. Because you took his love and made it infinite." October 3rd arrived with perfect autumn weather. Clear blue skies, golden aspens, air crisp and clean. Hundreds of people gathered at the Winter Brothers Healing Sanctuary for the dedication ceremony. Veterans in uniform stood shoulder to shoulder with families carrying photographs of loved ones lost. Reporters documented everything. Local officials gave speeches. But Emma barely heard any of it. She stood in front of the original cabin, wearing a simple blue dress her grandmother had made, holding a wreath of wildflowers. The same wildflowers that grew around the cabin every spring. When it was time for her to speak, she walked to the podium they'd set up in the meadow. The crowd fell silent. 6 years ago, I was 8 years old and lost in a blizzard, Emma began. I found this cabin by accident, or maybe not by accident. Maybe Samuel Winter had been waiting 75 years for exactly that moment, for exactly that lost little girl. She looked out at the faces, young and old, grieving and hopeful, all touched by Samuel's story in some way. People ask me all the time if Samuel wasted his life, if he should have moved on, found happiness, stopped waiting for someone who was never coming back. And every time, I say the same thing. Samuel didn't waste a single day, because every log he stacked, every jar he filled, every journal entry he wrote, it was all an act of love, and love is never wasted. Her voice grew stronger. This sanctuary isn't just about Samuel and Thomas anymore. It's about all of us. Everyone who's ever lost someone and didn't know how to go on. Everyone who's ever made a promise they couldn't break. Everyone who's ever loved so deeply that letting go felt like dying. She paused, gathering herself. Samuel taught me that survival isn't just about staying alive. It's about carrying forward the people who couldn't. About keeping promises even when they're hard. About loving fiercely, even when it hurts. And now, because of all of you, because of your donations and your stories and your belief in this place, we get to teach that lesson to thousands of others. Emma looked at the cabin, then back at the crowd. The Winter Brothers Healing Sanctuary is officially open. Come here when you're hurting. Come here when you're lost. Come here when you need to remember that love doesn't die just because people do. Samuel Winter waited 75 years to save one life. Let's use his gift to save thousands more. The crowd erupted in applause. Emma stepped back, tears streaming down her face, and her grandfather was there to catch her. Frank held her tight while she sobbed into his shoulder. "You did good, kid," he whispered. "Samuel's smiling down on you, I guarantee it." After the ceremony, people toured the new facilities. The retreat cabins, each named after a different value Samuel had embodied. Devotion, patience, honor, love. The community center with its walls of journals and letters. The trails winding through the forest to quiet reflection spots. But most people gravitated to the original cabin, to the source, to the place where it all began. Emma watched them file through, touching the mantel, reading the carved words, sitting in front of the fireplace where she'd sat 6 years ago. She saw veterans weeping, saw widows praying, saw children asking their parents what waiting meant. One veteran, a young woman, maybe 25, stopped Emma outside. "I lost my squad in Syria," she said, voice shaking. 3 years ago. I've been trying to move on, but I can't. Everyone says I should get over it, but being here, seeing what Samuel did, it makes me think maybe I don't have to get over it. Maybe I just have to learn to carry it differently." Emma took her hand. "That's exactly right. You don't have to let go. You just have to decide what you're carrying forward, the pain or the love. Samuel chose love. You can too." The woman nodded, tears falling. "Thank you for doing this, for understanding." Emma hugged her, this stranger who wasn't a stranger at all, just another person touched by loss, another soul saved by Samuel's story. The sanctuary's first official program launched a week later, a 5-day retreat for combat veterans dealing with survivor's guilt and PTSD. 12 men and women came, ranging from 22 to 67 years old, wars from Vietnam to Afghanistan. Emma wasn't supposed to be part of the program. She was only 14. But she asked if she could sit in on the first session, just to listen. The group gathered in the community center around a circular arrangement of chairs. A therapist named Dr. Patricia Moss led the session. She was gentle but direct. Her own brother lost to suicide after returning from Iraq. "This week, we're going to do something different," Dr. Moss said. "We're not here to get over anything. We're not here to move on or let go. We're here to learn how to carry our people forward with honor instead of pain, how to transform grief into legacy." One veteran, a man in his 40s named Daniel, spoke up. "How? I've been trying for 8 years. I can't sleep, can't hold a job, can't stop seeing their faces." Dr. Moss nodded. "Tell me about them." Daniel's voice broke. My best friend, Martinez, IED took him. He was 23, had a kid he never met. Every day I wake up and think, why him? Why not me? Samuel Winter asked himself the same question, Emma said quietly from her seat in the corner. Why Thomas? Why not him? He never found an answer. But he found something else, a way to keep Thomas alive through devotion. Daniel looked at her. I don't know how to do that. Neither did I, Emma admitted. I was 8 years old, terrified, alone. But Samuel's journals taught me, 1 page at a time, 1 day at a time. He didn't wake up knowing how to wait 75 years. He just woke up and chose to wait 1 more day, and then another, until it became his purpose. Another veteran, a woman named Rachel, leaned forward. So we just, dedicate our whole lives to people who are gone? That sounds like what he did, and he died alone. Emma shook her head. He died devoted. There's a difference. And yes, he was alone physically, but he was never lonely. He had Thomas. He had the promise. He had purpose. That's more than a lot of people get. The room fell quiet. Then Dr. Moss spoke again. This week, we're going to help you find your version of Samuel's cabin, the thing you build to honor who you lost. It doesn't have to be a physical structure. It can be art, service, advocacy, anything. But it has to transform your grief into something that helps others. Because that's what Samuel did, whether he knew it or not. He prepared a place that would save a stranger 80 years later. That's the ultimate legacy. Over the next 5 days, Emma watched the group transform. They hiked the trails, talking about their fallen friends. They sat in the original cabin, reading Samuel's journals, connecting with his devotion. They built things with their hands, small wooden boxes to hold memories, carved stones for a memorial garden. By the final day, Daniel had written a letter to Martinez's daughter. Rachel had started sketching plans for a non-profit serving Gold Star families. Others had made commitments to therapy, to community service, to living in ways that honored the dead. At the closing ceremony, each veteran placed a stone in the memorial garden they'd created together. On each stone, a name, someone they'd lost, someone they were choosing to carry forward. Daniel placed his stone carefully, Martinez's name carved deep. He looked at Emma with red eyes. Thank you. For this place, for Samuel's story, for showing us there's another way. Emma smiled through tears. Thank you for coming, for trusting this. Samuel would be honored. As the veterans left, Emma walked to the memorial garden alone. 13 stones now sat in a circle, 13 names, 13 promises being kept. She added her own stone to the center. On it she'd carved Samuel and Thomas Winter, brothers, heroes, forever waiting, forever loved. The years continued to pass. Emma grew older, but her devotion to the sanctuary never wavered. She spent her summers working there, guiding tours, helping with programs, maintaining Samuel's cabin with the same care he'd shown. By the time she was 16, she was being invited to speak at national conferences on grief, trauma recovery, and legacy building. Her TED Talk, The Man Who Waited 75 Years to Save My Life, got millions of views. Universities offered her scholarships. Publishers wanted her to write a book. Producers approached about a film. But Emma stayed focused. The sanctuary was what mattered. Samuel's story was what mattered. On her 17th birthday, Emma sat alone in the original cabin. It was early morning, the sun just beginning to paint the mountains gold. She'd brought coffee in a thermos and Samuel's final journal. She opened it to the last entry. March 14th, 2021. I'm 87 now. This is probably my last trip. I can barely make the hike anymore. But I made it. The cabin's still here, still perfect. I stocked the shelves one last time. If someone finds this place after I'm gone, I hope they understand. I wasn't crazy. I was devoted. Thomas, if you're out there somewhere, I'll see you soon. I love you, brother. I never stopped. Samuel. Emma closed the journal and wiped her eyes. Then she pulled out a pen and opened to the next blank page. She hesitated only a moment before writing. October 3rd, 2033. My name is Emma Hartford. I'm 17 years old. 12 years ago, I stumbled into this cabin during a blizzard, and Samuel Winter saved my life. I've spent the past 12 years trying to repay that debt by turning his devotion into something bigger, something healing. I don't know if I've succeeded, but I know Samuel would be proud. The cabin isn't waiting anymore, Samuel. It's living, it's breathing, it's saving lives every single day, just like you always hoped it would. Thank you for waiting. Thank you for never giving up. Thank you for teaching me that love is the only thing that really survives us. I promise to keep this place alive for as long as I can, and when I can't anymore, I'll find someone else to carry it forward. Your story will never die, neither will Thomas's, because some promises are too sacred to break. With love and gratitude, Emma Hartford. She closed the journal carefully and placed it back on the shelf where it belonged. Then she stood and walked to the mantel. The carved words looked exactly as they had 12 years ago. Samuel Winter, 1943, waiting. She traced the letters with her finger, feeling the grooves Samuel's hands had carved 80 years earlier. You can rest now, she whispered. The waiting is over. You did it. You saved me. And through me, you're saving hundreds of others. Your promise is kept. Your love lives on. You and Thomas can finally be together. Finally build that cabin in whatever comes after this. You've earned it. The cabin was silent, but Emma felt something shift in the air, something gentle, something like peace. She picked up the wreath of wildflowers she'd brought and stepped outside. The memorial garden had grown since that first group of veterans. Now there were hundreds of stones, hundreds of names, hundreds of promises being kept. She placed her wreath at the base of the stone she'd placed years ago, Samuel and Thomas's stone. I'll be back, she promised. I'll always come back. A year later, Emma graduated high school as valedictorian. Her speech wasn't about academic achievement or future plans. It was about a cabin and a promise and a man who'd taught her everything that mattered. We spend so much time chasing success, she told her classmates, chasing money, fame, comfort. But Samuel Winter taught me that none of that matters as much as one thing: love. The kind of love that keeps promises, the kind that doesn't give up, the kind that waits 75 years if it has to. She looked out at her class, kids she'd grown up with, but who couldn't understand what she'd experienced. I know most of you think I'm obsessed with an old cabin and a dead man's story, and maybe I am, but I'd rather be obsessed with something meaningful than indifferent to everything. Samuel Winter changed my life, and through me, he's changing thousands of others. That's what I want my life to be about. Not personal success, but continuing the legacy of someone who understood what really matters. After graduation, colleges competed for her, but Emma chose a small state school close to Coldwater Ridge, close to the sanctuary, close to her purpose. She studied psychology and social work, but spent every weekend at the cabin, leading programs, guiding veterans, maintaining Samuel's legacy. By the time she was 21, she'd helped over 2,000 veterans and family members find healing through the sanctuary. The program had expanded to include grief counseling, wilderness therapy, and family retreat weekends. Samuel's cabin had become exactly what Thomas's letter had asked for: a place filled with life and joy. A place that helped others. A place that transformed pain into purpose. On the anniversary of her rescue, Emma always made the pilgrimage alone. She hiked the same trail she'd stumbled down 12 years earlier, stood in the same spot where she'd first seen the cabin through the blizzard. This year she was 20. The anniversary fell on a Tuesday, cold and clear. She approached the cabin slowly, carrying fresh flowers. The building looked exactly as it had that day, preserved, protected, loved. She unlocked the door and stepped inside. The fireplace, the table, the shelves, everything maintained exactly as Samuel had left it. She walked to the mantel and placed the flowers beside the carved words. Happy anniversary, Samuel. 20 years since you made your last visit. 12 years since you saved my life. I wanted you to know what's happened since then. She pulled a folder from her backpack and opened it. 2,300 veterans served, 412 families counseled, 16 suicide attempts prevented, Dozens of marriages saved, hundreds of people learning to live with grief instead of being buried by it. Her voice broke. "You did this, Samuel. Your devotion, your refusal to give up. It's rippling out in ways you never could have imagined. Thomas would be so proud. I'm so proud." She sat on the floor in front of the fireplace, exactly where she'd sat as an 8-year-old girl, and she cried. Not from sadness, but from gratitude, from awe, from the overwhelming realization that one person's love could echo across generations and save thousands of lives. When she finally composed herself, she stood and walked to the desk. Samuel's journals were still there, preserved in climate-controlled cases now, but available for visitors to read. She opened the case and pulled out a blank journal they kept for visitors to write in, a continuation of Samuel's legacy. She wrote, "To everyone who comes here searching for answers, I want you to know something. Samuel Winter never got his brother back. He waited 75 years and Thomas never came home. But Samuel's love never died. It grew, it transformed, and eventually it saved a little girl lost in a storm. That little girl is me. And I've spent the past 12 years trying to multiply that love, to take what Samuel gave me and give it to others. You're here because you're hurting, because you've lost someone, because you don't know how to go on. I can't tell you how to stop hurting, but I can tell you what Samuel taught me. Love doesn't require the person to be present. It just requires you to be devoted. Keep the promise, honor the memory, carry them forward in everything you do. That's not wasting your life. That's giving it meaning." Welcome to the Winter Brothers Healing Sanctuary. Samuel and Thomas are waiting for you, not to take your pain away, but to show you how to transform it into something beautiful. With love, Emma Hartford. She closed the journal and placed it back on the desk. Then she walked to the window and looked out at the sanctuary, at the retreat cabins filled with people learning to heal, at the trails where veterans walked and talked and remembered, at the memorial garden where hundreds of names were carved in stone. This was Samuel's true legacy, not the waiting, the love that made the waiting meaningful, the devotion that transcended death and touched the living. Emma pressed her hand against the cold window and smiled. "Thank you, Samuel, for everything, for waiting, for preparing, for teaching me that some promises are worth keeping no matter how long it takes. I'll keep yours for as long as I live, and when I'm gone, someone else will carry it forward. Your story will never end, because love like yours never dies." The sun set behind the mountains, painting the snow-covered peaks orange and gold. The sanctuary grew quiet as evening approached. But inside the cabin, Emma felt anything but alone. She was surrounded by ghosts, but not the scary kind, the kind that remind us we're never truly alone, that the people we love stay with us in everything we do, in every promise we keep, in every act of devotion. Samuel Winter had waited 75 years for a brother who never came home. But in doing so, he'd created a sanctuary for thousands who needed to know they weren't alone in their grief. And Emma Hartford, the 8-year-old girl who'd stumbled into that cabin during a blizzard, had become the keeper of that sanctuary, the voice of that legacy, the proof that one person's love can change the world. As she locked the cabin door and walked back down the trail, she thought about all the lives that had been touched, all the veterans who'd found peace, all the families who'd learned to grieve with grace, all the people who'd discovered that love doesn't end when people die. It just waits for someone brave enough to carry it forward. Samuel had been that brave. Emma was that brave. And now thousands of others were learning to be that brave too. Because in the end, that's what the cabin had always been about. Not waiting for the dead to return, but learning to carry them with us into the future. Not holding on to pain, but transforming it into purpose. Samuel Winter had spent 75 years teaching that lesson, and Emma Hartford would spend the rest of her life making sure the world never forgot it. The cabin stood in the clearing, smoke curling from its chimney, lights glowing in its windows. It wasn't frozen in silence anymore. It was alive with purpose, with healing, with love. And somewhere, in whatever comes after this life, two brothers were finally building their cabin together. Finally, at peace. Finally home. Because Emma had kept the promise. She'd carried their story forward, and in doing so she'd proven that love, real love, is the only thing that truly survives us. Anyone can change the world if they're devoted enough to keep a promise, brave enough to honor the past, and loving enough to carry forward those who couldn't finish their journey. As the stars emerged over the Winter Brothers healing sanctuary, Emma Hartford didn't head for her car. Instead, she turned back one last time to look at the cabin, at the life Samuel had built and the legacy she'd transformed. The girl who'd once been saved by a stranger's devotion had become the woman who saved thousands with that same devotion. Because for Emma, and for everyone she'd helped along the way, the greatest gift we can give the dead isn't letting them go. It's refusing to let them be forgotten. It's keeping their promises. It's loving them loudly enough that the echo reaches those who need it most. Samuel Winter waited 75 years to save one life. Emma Hartford spent 12 years multiplying that salvation into thousands. And this was only the beginning, because legacy isn't about how we die. It's about what we leave behind that refuses to stop living. The end. Up next, 2 more powerful stories are waiting for you. Click to keep discovering what happens when ordinary people refuse to give up on extraordinary love. And don't forget to hit subscribe if you believe the truth deserves a voice and promises deserve to be kept.